Hi, I'm Brian Storrie. I came to Virginia Tech in the middle 1970s. This was a period of great expansion and change here because this was a period just after desegregation being settled in the South. So this was a real period of expansion and enrollment. Virginia Tech went to 17,000 students in the middle 70s, where it was only a few thousand during the previous decade. So there was a small group of Jewish faculty, maybe 40 families here, and this was a time in which things like the Blacksburg Jewish Community Center were being organized, and Hillel existed at Virginia Tech. There were probably several hundred Jewish students here, but it existed as a club, which was advised by one of a number of faculty members. So, for example, Marvin Blecker was the sponsor for a number of years, then Dan Farkas became the sponsor, and I succeeded Dan Farkas. Dan Farkas sort of roped me in initially to try to perhaps financial stability, or at least start something in terms of financial stability for the Hillel, and I took this over and did it probably for more than a decade. I saw the role as being the role of doing two things. One, trying to have student services, trying to work with students and being open, inclusive, and being able to work with students who came from really very different Jewish backgrounds. So some students would come from, say, a Jewish day school background. Some had never done bar mitzvah. When you have a small group of, say, 20 to 30 people coming together, these are differences that can be important. I was a person who was willing to, say, put together databases. So one collects these hundreds of names, so by the end of a year, one would have, through Passover and various holidays and such, say, a list of, say, 200 Jewish students here at Tech, and maybe 40 to 50 from Radford, the neighboring college. And in putting these together, one sees that one's probably only making contact with, say, a quarter of the potential Jewish student population. They're there, and this population should have been better served. So my hope in being the faculty advisor was that I would be the last faculty advisor, that one would go to a situation where one had someone as a committed staff person who was doing this as more a position rather than a few free hours in a week. And my hope was to indeed become the last faculty advisor. So I spent time going around the state to, say, meet the people who were B'nai B'rith. This was the past sponsor of Hillel's, and to say, hey, look, we ought to get more than $360 a year. We get at least $750. And to make contacts with people in Richmond at the Federation level, people in Tidewater. And actually the hardest to make any progress with was Greater Washington, because Greater Washington, shall we say, Tidewater, Richmond, B'nai B'rith was based out of Lynchburg at that time. These Jewish institutions saw themselves as at least being Virginia. But I will say Greater Washington really was doubtful about whether it was actually Virginia. And so that took real persistence to get anything out. So the nature of trying to build relationships is you start, you get a no, you try again, you get another no. You keep going for some years, and eventually we did regular allocation, maybe $1,000 from Greater Washington, a little bit more from Tidewater, and a situation where, say, Tidewater would expect that there would be a yearly formal request. So I was able then, towards the end of my time as being the club advisor, to start to have somebody at least be a part-time Hillel person here in Blacksburg. And we built up to a budget of about $20,000 a year. It went for part-time, and we were then sharing space with the Blacksburg Jewish Community Center. If I have the street name right, the Blacksburg Jewish Community Center is on Church Street, which is sometimes the nature of small towns in the Southwest Virginia. It was actually the corner of Church and Roanoke Street, which was then renovated. I was president for 2 years of the Blacksburg Jewish Community Center. It was part of doing the renovation of that center. We knocked down the ceiling in the basement to sort of pull out the old knob and tube wiring, things like this. So that's a digression, but not a total digression in the sense that that's where Hilo would meet as an off-campus place. So one of the things that did happen over the years was Hilo went from meeting almost entirely on campus to meeting off campus as a separate organization from Virginia Tech. It's a process. We had an office within the back portion, the first floor of the Blackbird Jewish Community Center, where someone as a part-time Hilo person could have a desk, things like that, and phones. I tried to convince people who weren't very familiar with computers at that time that indeed you had to sort of build computer databases of students. And we did do yearly mailings to long lists where you find people that you would never expect. For example, was a person in Charleston, West Virginia, who part of the Lord Reading Club when Hilo was known that way, and he had a junk company called the Raleigh Junk Company, and he was willing to give $1,000 a year as an individual to this. So one tries to build these various things to create some kind of infrastructure out of which something can grow. And I will simply say that, in my opinion, Hilo here is what I would think of as a grassroots organization, was sort of created locally, and then our contacts with Hilo International as the more formal organization have been things which are complementary and supplementary that help us be better off. And as part of doing this, I did actually go to a couple of Hilo conventions at that time to wave a flag and say, Virginia Tech exists. It's a large university today. There are hundreds of Jewish students there. Why don't you actually recognize us? So these are steps, and all I can say is that I think there was some success from this. Other people have taken it much, much further. Sue Kurtz has been a really essential person, but you have to be able to build at least from something. If you don't start to have some name recognition around the state, the region, it's hard to build, period. So I hope that was a contribution on my part. And I will say, I do remember students there where I think I made a difference to their lives. So it was fun, but some tribulations at the same time. Thanks.